Hey, what's up with the menus at the Cheesecake Factory? Why they gotta be so big?
Yeah, and why does their menu have ads? I go there for dinner, not to shop for appliances.
Hey, you know what, guys? This right here, this rambling, boring conversation containing already made before observations, this could be a podcast.
It's actually not a bad idea.
Really? A podcast? Don't you have to be some sort of whiz kid to do those?
Definitely not. Anyone with a computer can make one.
Well, that's it. We're anyone. Let's do a podcast from right here in the booth. Who's in?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do it.
All right, you guys, podcast time. We got the equipment and the perfect business plan. Give our show away for free and tell no one how to find it. Ready?
Hi, we're Fresh Air, and we do believe that we have a business plan that can work for you with podcasts. Yes, anyone can make them, but we can help you make something great. Something that audiences will love, something they'll be entertained by, fascinated by, and hopefully might win you some awards as well. I'm Neil Cowling, I run Fresh Air, and we are the UK's leading producer of podcasts for brands and businesses. And why would you do that? Why would you create a podcast for yourself? Well, we work with over 70 clients, from NGOs to large corporates to government departments, doing exactly this. And we explain that to create great podcasts is to create something very special for your business. It's something that no other medium can compete with. Why is that? It's because you've got undivided attention for 20 minutes or so of your audience. You can go into a depth and a nuance and a detail that it's almost impossible to do in any other medium. You can choose talent and a tone of voice that is perfect for you and that creates a piece of content that gets your messages across in a way that people will stick with for that amount of time and will share and love. But it's not easy. It's certainly not as easy as advertising on somebody else's podcast. So what we're going to do today is explain to you, with a couple of our clients and a couple of our case studies, how those projects came about, why they were successful, how they were implemented, and hopefully excite you about doing something similar. You need to think about who you're talking to, what your format might be, and how to promote it. So our first client today will be introduced by my brilliant colleague, our Director of Communication, our Director of Content, Michaela Hallam.
Hello, I am Michaela Hallam, and it's not easy, but it can be a whole lot of fun, and that is, I'm really happy to say, part of my job. I think that's twofold. The first thing is to help brands find a format that will absolutely deliver on their objectives and their KPIs, but we can't forget the audience. That's the second part. We need to find stories that they will enjoy in audio. They're not going to suffer through a 20-minute advert. They're really savvy. They won't even get as far as episode 2 if that's the case. And so it's my job to help us get to series 2 and beyond. And to bring that concept to life, I'm lucky enough to be joined by senior producer Greg Armfield. He is from one of the world's best known and best loved NGOs, WWF. Their podcast is called Call of the Wild. And I know I would say this, but it's a masterclass in creating informative, entertaining, and really motivating content for a particularly difficult to reach audience. So Greg, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to start at the beginning. What made you decide that a podcast was the right thing to do? What were your objectives?
Thanks, Michaela, for saying such nice things about WWF. We had 3 major objectives with this podcast. The first was WWF are typically known as a wildlife conservation charity, fluffy animals. We want to be known for more than that. So a podcast allowed us the kind of opportunity to talk about the depth and breadth of WWF's work. Alongside that, it was a great opportunity to engage a younger audience. WWF typically works very well with kind of primary age, and then once people get a bit grayer, we reconnect with people, but that 16 to 25-year-old age bracket we typically lose. So we know that the podcast world, the 16 to 25 bracket is a fast-growing audience, so for us it was a great opportunity. And finally, engagement. WWF works across the social media world, but that's a very light touch engagement. So for a podcast, it allowed us that 20 minutes or 30 minutes each episode to really dive down into a deep subject matter. So that was a great opportunity for us.
We'll come back to that, but that resulted in a format that is absolutely one of the most ambitious that we have created in our portfolio. And that was partly because of the target audience. We used a lot of Radio 1 references in the content that we created. We wanted something really fast-paced, punchy, with a lot of energy. We used lots of music and sound effects. There were about 6 different modules in every episode. But one of the main key ingredients was Kel Spellman. He was chosen specifically because he could engage our audience on their level. We're talking about quite big issues, and it was really important not to sound patronising or to talk down to them. And what he really managed to achieve was what felt like a conversation with friends around the table, and that was really important. But he was not the only celebrity involved in the podcast. We sprinkled quite a lot of celebrity stardust through the series. So can you explain to me a little bit more about why that was and how that worked?
Yeah, sure. Well, celebrities, or as we call them, artists and influencers, will always bring kudos. So for us, it was a no-brainer to use them. WWF are very lucky in that we have great relationships with a number of artists and influencers, or very warm relationships. So for us, it was a kind of no-brainer to get them involved, but also to ensure that we got the right people involved, kind of the ones who are going to bring that audience I talked about previously. So for us, it was really important to kind of get them involved. We work with fantastic individuals. We work with the Sex Education cast, Birdie, Lily Cole, David Lindo, the urban bird watcher, and of course the main man, Sir David Attenborough. So on that note, that brings amazing publicity and marketing for us, and any podcast, especially an NGO podcast, needs to have that punch at the beginning. So having Sir David on board was fantastic for publicity. So we got Kel on Lorraine's sofa, we were on the BBC sofa, and we got hundreds of pieces of media across the board. So for us, it was fantastic to get them involved.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, to make sure that you don't just make great content, but that you've got the means to shout about it as well. Okay, so it wasn't easy. I think we've all established that making a podcast is something that's going to take a lot of energy, a lot of love. The question everyone's going to be asking is it worth it?
Yes, it's definitely worth it. Obviously, we went through a lot of strain, a lot of pressure during lockdown as well. So it was a fantastic opportunity. Yeah, but definitely worth it. In terms of the stats and the data we've pulled out, 67% of our audience were under 34. So we've ticked that box straight away. We were in the top 10 science and nature podcasts throughout the series. We were in the top 10% globally of all podcasts. And most importantly of all, we had a 67 or a 70% listen through rate. So from an engagement perspective, it was fantastic for us.
And how many days of engagement did you have with your brand, Greg?
At last count, it was around 525 days or more of listenership, days in total. So that's pretty amazing for us.
Yeah, of one-to-one engagement with the brand. Although for me, I'll come back to where I started, and that was one of the biggest measures of success is Series 2. And we actually had our kick-off meeting yesterday.
We did.
We are greenlit for Series 2. And once again, we will be involving Kel Spellman. So who better to hear from about Series 1 than Kel?
Let's do it.
And I'm the presenter of the Call of the Wild podcast from WWF, which was an absolute joy and dream come true for myself. It's actually one of my proudest and most special bodies of work. Creating a podcast definitely allowed us as WWF to tap into a audience that maybe necessarily we would not be reaching. I think to see WWF in the podcast space was something that was quite different and that was quite new, but was also super cool because we were actually being able to get to people that maybe necessarily wouldn't have thought about going to WWF's maybe website or maybe kind of to one of their social media pages. And ultimately as well, it was just a great way for us to have the conversation that we all wanted to have without anybody kind of, having what they wanted to have put in it. It was a real collaborative experience of us coming together to formulate the episodes, highlight the areas of conversation that we wanted to dig into, and then collectively making the content and pulling it all together. And I think that's what you get with the podcast. I've realised it's a great way in which you can really have a lot of kind of control creatively and also in the content that I don't think you'd necessarily get anywhere else. And when it was their podcast, they were able to say what they wanted, how they wanted it to work, and what it would include. So all in all, it was a really brilliant experience, I think, for us all. And I think it seemed to have gone down well and received quite well. Fingers crossed we'll be doing a series 2. And I think that's just a credit to the team and all the work that was put into it. So yeah, it really was an absolute joy and something that I'll be very proud of and I'm very grateful for.
So thanks to Greg, thanks to Cal. And now we're going to talk about our second case study, the second client that we brought in today, for a project that was very different, an audience that was very different. It was called Rewirement, and it's for legal in general. And this was a series where we took case studies and experts to talk about financial planning for retirement. Joining me to talk about this is Millie Hyde-Smith. She's head of PR and content for legal in general, retail retirement. Millie, thank you very much for joining us. I remember the original kickoff meeting for this because you came in and you said that you wanted an engaging, entertaining podcast about retirement planning. And it felt tough. It was a challenge, but we love a challenge. So what brought you to that point? What made you think that a podcast was right for you?
Well, first of all, apologies, it was a tough brief. The reason we did it is because we know that people find it difficult to engage with finances. They get all the financial bump and it puts them off. So we were looking for new ways to engage our audience, and podcast being audio, we thought it's quite personal. There's a quite bit of emotion to it, which counters the finance stuff. So we thought we'd do a bit of an experiment and try it.
And it's not right from the start in that brief. We've always known it wasn't about shifting product. It's not about selling pension plans. It was about storytelling. But you obviously need to weave your messaging in there. You need to get L&G's message across. So explain a little bit, please, about how that worked.
Yeah, so first of all, as you say, it wasn't about acquisition. It's primarily for us a brand project. So what we wanted to do, first of all, is tell people stories and make it more personal and more storytelling. So we had a sort of people like us was our idea. And that works really well because people can relate to other people. So we had some fantastic case studies and all the people involved were amazing stories. But yes, we do still need to have our brand message. So the format we chose was actually inspired by another podcast, which I can't remember the name of, sorry, Claudia Winkleman. That's it. So we have our experts reflect on the stories at the end. And then the continuity is given by Angelica Bell, who's our host, and she brings it all together.
And we've made 2 series now, a year apart. It changed a lot. It evolved a lot from series 1 to series 2. What did you learn and what did you change as you went through that process?
Yeah, it massively evolved, and the second series was phenomenally successful. We learned a lot from the first one, which was good. But what we changed, one of the major things we changed was our spend. So in the first series, we had a paid social campaign to support the podcast, which targeted our target audience. But when we looked at the data very early on in the podcast series, we realised that what we were doing was converting people to podcasts, and we were asking that spend to work too hard. So we switched it to do just advertising within other podcasts, and we targeted it by choosing podcasts that we know our audience, because we obviously know our audience very well. We knew that they would be listening to and respond to. So yeah.
And the format evolved in terms of a change of presenter.
Yeah, so we also, because of the pandemic, we were forced to change the format a bit. So the first series we had, for one, before the pandemic struck, we had everybody in a room and everyone knew each other. And we couldn't do that for the second series. We had to get people individually to open up. So we needed a presenter who could get people to do that, to talk about money in their personal lives to a stranger. So Angelica Bell was chosen as our host because she's got great empathy, she's a real people person, and she was fantastic at getting people to open up. Plus, she also has an association with money because she co-hosts the ITV Money Show. So for us, it was a double tick. Yeah.
Brilliant. So we've heard the client's point of view. And Angelica, as Millie said, is a real asset. Let's hear from the talent's point of view how it works.
Watching this. My name's Angelica Bell, and I'm just here to tell you about the podcast I did this year alongside Legal in General. We worked together to produce Rewirement, which was brilliant. I loved doing it. What was great was that Legal in General knew exactly what they wanted to do, what the content was. And they allowed me as well to come to the table with some expertise with interviewing people and working in broadcasting and doing so much presenting. And we came out with this amazing podcast with fantastic contributors who felt comfortable to tell us their stories that were relatable, stories that would help people in the future to make the right decisions with their finances and also in retirement. I knew it was the right thing to do, especially when I went on holiday. I was in Devon and someone came up to me and said, I recognised your voice because I listened to Rewirement and I got so much from it. And that just filled my heart with so much joy because it meant it was reaching out there and we were getting the message across. So that's why I was involved. That's why I loved it. And hopefully you will have heard it.
Hello, I'm Richard Blake. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Fresh Air, and I help grow your podcast. So not only do we just do a very organised plan and process. So for starts, we create some set of goals, because if you've got some great goals and you know you're going to measure them properly, we set a strategy so you know what's right with your business and it fits with your business goals really, really well. We do a lovely launch campaign, so you bring an audience to it using all the podcast media that we have, and then you create a fantastic community around your podcast, and we help you build that community so your audience is engaging and interacting. Now, one thing at Fresh Air that we absolutely love is Canada. We love maple syrup, we love Nessie Nielsen, but the big thing we love about Canada is Pacific Content. They're basically the North American version of us. They make branded content. And I'm really excited to announce today that we've partnered with Pacific Content to create a global centre of excellence for branded podcast. You'll be able to access talent from across the globe to make your branded podcast, and you can create a global podcast strategy, but execute locally brilliantly. And it gives you access to all the people who are able to help to grow your podcast: strategists, creatives, showrunners, and analysts. And to tell you a bit more about it, there's Steve Pratt, who's a bit of a podcast legend, who's going to tell you a bit more about it now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I thought I would tell you the quick story of how this partnership between Fresh Air Productions and Pacific Content came to life. I got introduced to Neil. He's in London. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, and we had our first Zoom call. And my first impression was, wow, Neil's a super nice guy. I like this guy a ton already. And then we talked about our companies and we're like, wow, our companies are really, really similar. We kind of do exactly the same thing in different markets. And then we talked more and we realized we have the same values and the same way we approach this. We both love working with brands. We both love using creativity to solve problems for businesses in audio. And we both are really interested in helping make it easier for brands to find success in this new and exciting space of podcasting. And then I met more people on Neil's team, and they were awesome and smart also. And we said, we should really try and do something together. What's the right thing for us to do? And we kind of instantly realized partnering together for global brands makes a ton of sense. So we have a very strong base in the US and Canada. Neil's got an amazing base with Fresh Air in the UK and Europe and the Middle East. Together, when global brands come in and want to make podcasts that reflect the global nature of their business, or want to tell stories very specific to particular markets and be authentic and have people on the ground who really understand brand storytelling in those markets, or who want to represent a diversity of voices around the world or localization strategies with their brand marketing, we could do an amazing job by coming together and partnering. So that is exactly what we've done. We're super excited about it. We have so many clients that are going to be a great fit for a global podcast strategy and can't wait to start working together. Thanks, everybody.
We love Steve. He heads up Pacific content in Canada, and we very much look forward to working with them more. So we hope we've excited you about the idea of building your own podcast, as well as perhaps advertising it in other podcasts. And if you'd like to find out more about the projects that we've done, hear interviews with more of our clients and going through exactly the same process that you've seen this afternoon, picking apart what we do and thinking about why certain podcasts were successful, then search for Fresh Ears. It's the podcast that we make where we do exactly this on a weekly basis. We take a podcast campaign, we pick it apart, and we understand why it worked. So yeah, please do search for Fresh Ears on your podcast app. And in the meantime, please do consider the idea of building your own podcast. It really is a way of creating valuable content and telling your story in audio in a way that is impossible to do anywhere else.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. I'm sold. I'm convinced. Michaela, you talked with Greg about, if I got the number correct, you talked about 525 days of engagement. That's a very different way of talking about whether something worked. We seem to be an industry obsessed with clicks and listens and views. Do you have to do a lot to fight against that? I mean, what's your take on how we're doing on an industry on measurement?
Well, I think you have to approach it from a different perspective, because podcasting is about engagement. And previous conversations with Greg are that in the Instagram world, you might have 6 seconds worth of time to pull in and engage an audience, and you can't say very much in that time. And so I think it's really worth understanding and changing the prism of how you measure success in the podcast world. And so, yeah, we look at not only time spent with brand, and I will pass to Neil in a minute to tell you how we work that out, but also listening time. So you've got an optimum time for a podcast of how long your audience will listen for. And what we want to do is not track just how many people, but make sure that they're continuing to listen for the majority of that podcast time as well. It's really important.
Attention and just real deep immersion in your brand story, which is you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, give us a little look into the magician's hat, Neil, on how you do it.
There are various platforms that give us various bits of data. I wish every platform gave us everything, but they don't. But it's a young and fast-growing medium, and therefore we admit, as much as everybody else, we are exploring how to measure, how to judge success as we go along. One thing that we don't do anymore is vanity projects. I think it's fair to say that a few years ago, in the evolution of branded podcasts, there were quite a lot of vanity projects where people would come to us and say, we want a podcast because it's cool.
Or there was a 20-minute advert.
And now that no longer happens. Much more strategic about it. Much more careful to, right at the start, work out what successful will mean, how to objectively measure that success. Because as Michaela says, you know, we're on to series 2 with both WWF and Legal in General, and a business doesn't invest money on an ongoing basis unless they can see that success. So yeah, we're measuring average duration. We're able to see a bit of gender and age distribution, and we're increasingly finding ways to both track the listening amount and also what people do as a result of listening.
And would you ever, maybe a hypothetical here and it hasn't happened, would you ever say no to a client who comes to you and says, yeah, you know, in that situation, you know, it was like when the App Store appeared, everyone wanted an app and we filled it with all of these branded apps. Would you ever say to someone, do you know what, it's probably not quite right? Have you?
Yeah, we would, and we have. And I think clients appreciate that because they understand that we're experts in audio. Almost every single brand who ever comes to us says, we've never done this before, we've never made a podcast, we've never done audio before, so we need your help. So that's what we're here to do. And I think we're learning actually, even more as we go along, that if you don't say that up front, if you don't be firm up front and say, we're not here to make a long advert for you, then you suffer the consequences as you go on because you create something that people don't want to listen to.
Yeah. It was amazing. I loved it up front. And I love the fact that we're talking about the work with the clients as well, which I think is really, really important. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you.